Too risky? Can pondered the map, his heart heavy with the burden of command. As the supreme leader, he was responsible for his own fate, and if he failed here, he would lose everything. The anxiety gnawed at him. Is there a better tactical plan? He asked slowly. Fatties shook his head, regret etched into his brow. This is the only way. Our strength is simply too small. Cand narrowed his eyes. It was true. 200 peasants were useless in a real fight. He could only rely on 25 Swadian light infantry and 70 militia. These were his true steel, men capable of crushing the primitive gnolls, but their numbers were pitiful. For a moment, he considered delaying his quest, just as he had delayed the establishment of his village for 16 years. Even with his secret trump card, a card that could summon 500 Vigor sharpshooters for 3 devastating volleys, victory felt like a distant dream. Fatties, Can said, his voice dropping to a grave whisper, if we launch a desperate attack, can we win? Fatties nodded heavily. Yes. He explained that the light infantry were equipped with full iron chainmail, kite shields, and heavy spears, gear that outclassed anything the gnolls possessed. If they abandoned all hope of survival and fought with a suicidal fury, they could trade wounds for death and break 500 gnolls. Good, Cand replied, clenching his fists. Only by destroying that tribe can we find true peace, otherwise everything we have is an illusion. As night fell over Sentry Oasis, a somber silence took hold. The only sound was the rhythmic hammer of construction workers. Inside the ruler's hall, by the flickering light of white candles, the 2 men hovered over a hand-drawn map. They rehearsed every move, every contingency. The attack begins before dawn, Fatties summarized, when their vigilance is lowest. I will lead 17 elite desert bandits to assassinate the Gnoll shaman. Once their leader falls, the tribe will collapse into chaos. Can's eyes flashed with a dangerous light, and I will lead the main force to scatter them. If they resist, the 3 volleys will finish it. He knew the cost would be high. There would be a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, but for the sake of the future, Cand, the egoist, the noble, the survivor, was willing to pay it. I will recruit more Swadian recruits tonight, he resolved. For this battle, we leave nothing to chance. The tactical plan was set. After hours of deep discussion with Fatties, Cand finally felt a sense of relief. Everything was ready, save for the final push. Cand stretched his stiff neck, glancing toward the window. The night was deep and pure. On the table, the candle had melted into a small, white stub. 3 hours had slipped away in silence. Outside, the construction hammers had long since ceased. The only sound was the rhythmic, subtle friction of leather boots on sand. The scheduled patrol of the Swadian militia. Inside the hall, 10 light infantrymen stood like statues, spears and shields gripped tightly in the dim light. Fatties, go and get some rest, Cand murmured, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Yes, my lord, Fatties replied, his voice thick with exhaustion. He bowed respectfully and retreated to his quarters. Cand turned to the guards, his voice low but firm. Stay alert, do not relax your vigilance. Cand climbed the stairs to his room and collapsed onto the bed. He didn't even remove his clothes. Dawn would come far too soon. The coming war would be brutal. Cand was preparing to lead 300 low-tier troops against a Gnoll tribe of at least 2,000. To the nobles of the Lion Duchy, this was pure fantasy, suicide even, but Cand had a secret source of confidence. The Gnolls were broken, their chieftain dead, their morale shattered, as Fatties had said. They were no longer an army, but a disorganized rabble. And Cand held a trump card, the golden lion flag planted outside, the deterrent might. This divine tool would crush the enemy's remaining will, turning the battlefield into a sea of chaos. When Cand opened his eyes, the sky was already bright. He headed downstairs, his joints popping with every movement. Fatties was already there, his expression solemn. Good morning, Lord Cand. I am heading out for reconnaissance. Be careful, Cand warned. If the northeast is clear, we launch the operation this afternoon. As Fatties departed, Cand turned his mind to the system. It was time to recruit, but as he reached out, a golden dialogue box flickered into existence. An event, villagers united against a common enemy. The peasants, desperate to protect their new home, were ready to take up arms. For a small fee of 10 dinars each, 200 Swadian recruits were ready to march. Cand's heart hammered against his ribs. Yes, he whispered, I accept. 400 dinars vanished from his coffers, and in their place, a guarantee of victory was born. The path to war was open. and Kand was no longer walking it alone. Confirmed, Kand selected the option, and the dinar balance in his mind dropped instantly. Right there in the sentry oasis, the Swadian peasants, who had just been crawling out of their sand pits, were suddenly enveloped by a surging stream of data. The light vanished as quickly as it appeared, but the figures left behind had changed. Their muscles bulged, their gazes turned sharp. Beneath tattered linen robes, they now wore dark brown leather armor. They carried wooden shields, short axes, and 2-meter spears clutched tightly in their hands. These were Swadian recruits, 200 of them. Though considered cannon fodder in the great human kingdoms, their systematic military training made them a lethal force against the primitive gnolls. This was Kand's source of confidence. As time passed, the aroma of food permeated the air. In the kitchen of the ruler's hall, a meal for 300 was prepared, thick kabeg. E-soup, toasted bread, dried meat, and dates. The atmosphere was heavy, solemn. Even the construction workers sat in silence, sensing the coming storm. Suddenly, a troop of cavalry appeared on the northeast dunes. It was Fatties and the 17 elite desert bandits. Fatties reined in his horse and dismounted. "Lord Kand," he reported, his expression relaxed. "No abnormal situations were found. The initial stage is smooth." "Good," Kand replied. "Eat breakfast first." By midday, the meal was finished, and the soldiers stood in neat, silent formations. Kand stepped forward for the pre-departure review. The system chimed in his mind, offering a reward of 100 prestige for this final pep talk. Kand's voice was grave, echoing across the sand. "We are about to welcome a new battle," he declared. "This afternoon, we go to conquer the gnolls, to make those primitive races kneel before us. This oasis was snatched from their hands, and now we will take the rest. They do not deserve to survive." He paused for dramatic effect, his tone chilling. "If you want a better future, then fight, kill those gnolls, and turn everything they own into ours." "Long life," the soldiers roared in unison. "Kill the gnolls." Kand smiled. The speech was a success. He turned to Fatties. "Prepare the supplies. We set off at 2 p.m. 3 carriages were loaded with bread, dried meat, and water skins, enough for a 3-day march. The madness before the battle had begun. Under the scorching sun, the sentry oasis prepared for war. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the air over the sentry oasis cooled as the troops assembled. At the head of the column, Lord Kand sat atop his horse beside Fatties. Nearby, the fat construction foreman from Suno trembled, sweat beading on his pale face. He recognized Fatties not just as a commander, but as the noble son of a high-ranking house. "Young Master Fatties," the foreman stammered, "who in Suno doesn't know you, although you and your brother?" Fatties' expression darkened into a mask of despair. "I am not some noble young master," he barked, his voice heavy with a secret shame. Kand watched in silence, knowing the truth. Fatties was a wandering knight because he had accidentally killed his own brother in a dispute over a courtesan, a tragedy that drove him into exile. Seeking to escape the awkward tension, Fatties rode to the front to supervise the men. Kand turned to the foreman, warning him to speak less of the past. "Take good care of my village," Kand commanded. The foreman, desperate to regain favor, bowed low. "We will guard it to the last man." Kand chuckled, spurred his horse, and shouted, "Let's go." The march began. 200 Swadian recruits, 70 militia, and 25 light infantry moved as one. Ahead, 18 elite desert bandits scouted the dunes. Their target, the Gnoll tribe to the northeast. For 2 days, they pushed through the shifting sands. They marched during the cool dawns and rested in day. Sand pits during the blistering heat of noon. Finally, at dusk on the second day, they reached the crest of a massive dune. Below them lay the Gnoll camp, a chaotic sprawl of tents teeming with enemies. "The numbers are indeed large," Fatties whispered. "Rest for now," Kand ordered. He knew the tactical advantage lay not in the twilight, but in the suffocating darkness before dawn, the hour when the mind is slowest and the heart most vulnerable. The soldiers huddled behind the dunes, eating in silence, weapons clutched to their chests. When the moon finally dipped below the horizon and the stars faded into ink, the camp stirred. "Wake up," the word passed like a ghost through the ranks. Fatties approached Kand, his desert bandits ready with flanged maces and specialized gear. The plan was set. "Take action," Kand commanded. As Fatties led his riders to circle the flank, Kand looked down at the silent, unsuspecting tribe. The war had begun. The night was quiet and cold, among the dunes of the Nalan Desert. Fatties walked briskly, leading his warhorse toward the western flank. Behind him, 17 elite desert bandits and a new recruit followed in silence, their eyes burning with a frenzied killing intent. To charge 19 cavalry into the heart of an enemy tribe for a decapitation strike was madness. If they succeeded, glory; if they failed, a sandy grave. Fatties looked up as the stars dimmed and the moon hid behind a shroud of ink. "That beam of light," he whispered, "will eventually pierce through all darkness." He nimbly flipped onto his horse and shook the reins. "It's our turn." Behind him, the 18 cavalry mounted with practiced grace. Hooves struck the soft sand with a muffled thud as they descended the dunes. On the opposite side, Can stood watching. He saw the black dots moving with lethal speed. "Everyone pay attention," Can commanded his Swadian soldiers, his voice low and grave. "Prepare to attack." On the western side, Fatties and his men became a howling gale. They tore through the knoll camp, splashing brown oil from waterskins onto the crude linen tents. The two bandits at the rear tossed fire pots, small barrels of glowing charcoal, into the wake. Whoosh! The oil ignited instantly. The desert's dryness turned the camp into an inferno within seconds. Bleary-eyed gnolls stumbled from their tents, howling in confusion as the fire consumed their homes. But Fatties didn't stop. He and his men trampled over the sleeping and the dead, driving their warhorses toward the center. Less than 100 meters ahead stood the great tent. 50 gnolls blocked the path, maces raised. "For Lord Cand, kill!" Fatties roared. His longsword severed heads while the bandits behind him skewered the monsters like candied haws on their spears. It was a brutal exchange of life for life. They reached the target, the gnoll shaman. The creature was old, its fur white, its eyes filled with a terrifying intelligence. "Humans," it hissed in the common tongue. It scattered a colorful powder, screaming a spell of bloodlust to drive its warriors into a frenzy. But the Saranid bandits were faster. They drew their short javelins and let them fly, swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The old shaman had no time to dodge. 4 javelins pierced its chest. As the leader collapsed, Fatties pulled his reins, striking down one last red-eyed gnoll. "Let's go." They didn't turn back. They cut straight through the burning tribe toward the east, just as a sky full of Can's arrows began to rain down upon the screaming shadows. Standing atop the shifting sand dune, Can remained calm, yet his eyes gleamed with a hidden, predatory light. In the distance, a raging fire blazed against the dark horizon. "Attack!" Can issued the command in a deep, resonant voice. Behind him, the rhythmic thud of footsteps echoed as 295 Swadian soldiers began their advance. Can drew his short sword with a sharp, metallic, swish asterisk. He walked at the front. Behind him, the infantry arranged themselves into 3 disciplined rows, their long spears leveled like a forest of steel. They began to jog, their speed increasing steadily. 800 meters ahead lay the Gnoll tribe. Hundreds of gray-brown creatures stood frozen, staring blankly at the western fires. In the desert, water is life, and they had none to spare for the flames. They never saw the humans coming. Suddenly, Can's deterrent might unfurled. A red banner featuring a golden lion snapped in the wind. Within 500 meters, an invisible wave of dread washed over the gnolls. Their hearts pounded with an inexplicable terror. "Arrow volley, cover," Can commanded. "First wave." In his mind, a golden card shimmered. High above, the deep night was pierced by a faint whistling that grew into a deafening roar. 500 iron bodkin arrows, the pride of the Vigir sharpshooters, descended in a beautiful, lethal arc. Whoosh and whoosh and whoosh. The heavy tips tore through fur and bone. Nearly 200 gnolls fell instantly, writhing like dying hedgehogs. "Kill!" Can roared. The Swadians charged. Their spears impaled the first line of defenders with a sickening thud. But the gnolls fought back with primitive frenzy, swinging wolf-headed clubs. A dozen recruits fell, and the smell of human blood drove the beasts into a cannibalistic rage. Can stood his ground, protected by his light infantry. "For Swadia," the men shouted, their blades swinging through foul-smelling blood. Can raised his hand again. "Arrow volley, cover." Another 500 arrows rained down, clearing the path like a purifying storm. Through the grime and gore, Can saw Fatties and the desert bandits reach the center of the camp. The Gnoll shaman staggered, several javelins buried in his chest, before collapsing into the sand. The gnolls broke, their morale shattered by the artifact and the death of their leader. They dropped th. our clubs and fled into the dark. Kan looked at his remaining 100 soldiers, then at the retreating shadows. He showed no mercy. Pursue them, he ordered coldly. Kill them all. Thud. Blood splattered as the short sword was wrenched from the knoll's eye socket. Kan swung his arm, sending a long streak of red splashing onto the dry earth. He kicked the collapsing corpse away, his face a mask of relief and bone-deep weariness. It's over, he whispered. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning fur and the heavy, metallic tang of blood. Kan stood amidst a sea of bodies. Most were gnolls, but many were his own fallen warriors from Swadia. This battle, won through Kan's fearless assault, had finally ended. The ownership of the Nalan desert had changed hands. Behind him, the Gnoll tribe was being consumed by a massive inferno. Heat waves rolled off the burning tents, turning the settlement into a pyre for those who couldn't escape. Kan watched the flames, feeling the heat drive away the desert night's chill. He was the victor, the conqueror, the noble baron of the Lion Duchy. His soldiers stood behind him, exhausted and smeared with gore. Many were limping, supporting one another. The cost of victory was staggering. We've lost 2/3 of our men, Kan sighed. Less than 100 remained. As the first beam of dawn pierced the darkness, the sound of hurried hoofbeats approached. Clip-clop and clip-clop. Fatties, Kan's only commander, rode out of the smoke, his armor scorched and his horse's mane singed. He dismounted and handed Kan a package seized from the Gnoll shaman. Inside lay a broken staff topped with a dark gemstone and a mysterious ancient book bound in sheepskin. Suddenly, a system interface flickered into Kan's vision. Ding! The main quest was complete. For his epic victory, Kan was rewarded with 10,000 dinars and a surge of prestige. But more importantly, his surviving troops were now eligible for massive upgrades. From recruits to heavy cavalry, his battered army was about to be reborn. But a final prompt appeared. The system sensed mysterious power within the shaman's items. A temporary quest emerged: System Assistance. If Kan sacrificed the artifacts, the system would absorb their energy to upgrade his village. Kan did not hesitate. Yes, he commanded. The system was his lifeline, his golden ticket in this cruel world. As the sun rose over the Nalan desert, the old world burned and a new empire began to stir. Kan's choice was naturally correct. As a transmigrator, his cheat was the only power he could rely on with peace of mind. Looking down at the bundle in his hands, fine data streams spread onto a broken staff, eroding the power within. The dull gem at its tip grew dimmer. This was the Gnoll shaman's staff. Shot to death by a javelin, Fatties spoke up, explaining the shaman's end. Thanks to those Saranid lads. He meant the desert bandits, boo. Fatties loathed outlaws and refused to use their titles. I must say, the Saranid short javelin is the strongest weapon in the desert. Kan nodded. He knew that even transcendent mages were made of mortal flesh. They feared swords, horse hooves, and most of all, a rain of arrows from a distance. This was why Kan had ordered the decapitation tactic, relying on the precision of his Saranid throwers. As the gem faded, the system absorbed its mana. Kan then turned his attention to an ancient, filthy book found with the staff. Its pages were made of papyrus covered in grime and hieroglyphs. What a waste, Kan snorted, flipping through the two thin pages. He thought of his old teacher, Scholar Hank, but quickly dismissed the notion. He could never expose his secret ability to anyone. Soon, the data chains consumed the book. A notification flashed across Kan's vision. Temporary quest, Systems Assistance completed. Reward, Village Upgrade. A golden card appeared on his retina, a prize for later. Now it was time for the main event. Kan had 10,000 dinars in his account and a host of battle-hardened troops ready to evolve. Open the troop interface, he commanded in a low, confident voice. Upgrade all. The system prompted, upgrading will consume 2,300 dinars. Proceed. Yes, Kan didn't hesitate. 46 Swadian militias transformed into Swadian light infantry, mainstay warriors clad in iron. Then, the prompt he had been waiting for appeared. His 41 light infantry could now become Swadian heavy cavalry. The kings of the battlefield. Upgrade, Kan commanded with urgent resolve. Suddenly, the air was filled with the sound of warhorses snorting. 41 knights in full-face helmets sat atop armored chargers, their eyes cold and calm. Behind them stood the new infantry, a wall of chainmail. Finally, 5 Saranid riders emerged, the precursors to the legendary Mamluks. Kan smiled, his army had finally undergone a massive transformation. Dawn broke gradually over the ruins of the Knoll tribe. The pre-dawn fire had reduced everything to ash, leaving an acrid, black smoke hanging over the charred remains. For the Swadians, this massacre was a simple necessity. For Sentry Oasis to survive, the Knolls had to perish. Kan emerged from his tent exhausted after only 2 hours of sleep. His focus shifted immediately to the well where a golden disc shimmered beneath the water. He signaled his men. "Find some rope," he commanded. "We are bringing that thing up." The soldiers moved quickly. They stripped the armor from their smallest comrade, secured a hemp rope around his waist, and lowered him into the depths. As he descended, the soldier marveled at the cool air. "It reminds me of autumn in Calradia," he called out, his voice echoing. "I could sleep down here." "Don't waste Lord Kan's time," a soldier above grunted, straining against the rope. Kan watched anxiously. This man was a future heavy cavalryman. His life was too valuable to lose to a well. "Be careful," Kan warned. "If anything feels wrong, we pull you up immediately." The soldier reached the bottom, the water rising only to his chest. He struggled with the heavy object, eventually bracing himself against the stone walls to heave the golden disc upright. "I've got it," he shouted. "Pull us up." It took a dozen men, gritting their teeth and hauling with all their might, to drag the soldier and his prize to the surface. The disc was massive, 1 meter wide and as heavy as 5 steel shields. As it hit the ground, a system notification flashed in Kan's vision: temporary quest, mystery in the well. The system offered to absorb the curio to enhance its own power. Kan knelt, but he didn't trigger the absorption. He felt a haunting sense of familiarity. He traced the delicate, mysterious patterns as the desert sun caused the disc to glow with a brilliant, golden halo. Suddenly, his eyes widened. "The lost city," he whispered. These were the sun-holy runes, legendary symbols of a golden civilization said to have existed thousands of years ago. His mentor, Scholar Hank, had been ridiculed for believing in it, but here was the proof: the lost city was real. Kan's expression hardened into a mask of calm. He looked at his loyal Swadian soldiers nearby. This was a discovery that could change the world, and it was a secret that must never be told. This news must not be spread. It is a secret known only to Kan himself, and until he possesses sufficient strength, he will keep it buried deep within. He knows that if this discovery were released, it would cause a massive wave in the Lion Duchy, easily clearing the mockery his teacher, Hank, currently faces. Yet Kan remains firm. He will not reveal the evidence of the lost city, nor will he allow the golden disc with its sun-holy runes to reappear in the eyes of the world. An ordinary man's wealth is his undoing. Even if this discovery could secure him a position as a glorious scholar, it is all predicated on one thing: staying alive. Kan understands the cold reality of the Lion Duchy. His own elder brother, the first in-line heir, wants him gone. To the nobles, Kan is an exile in a barren desert. But if they knew he held the key to a city built of gold, they would occupy his oasis in an instant, and Kan would die an unknown death. Greed is the most terrifying thing. On his retina, a dialogue box flashes. "Do you wish to give the item to the system for absorption?" Without hesitation, Kan nods. "Yes, absorb it." A stream of data envelops the disc. Within minutes, the relic vanishes from the world, leaving Kan with a heavy sense of relief. "Lord Kan, you look a bit pale," a voice calls out. It is Fatty's, approaching from the distance. "Would you like some water? I heard a well was discovered here." "I'm fine," Kan replies, his face returning to a mask of calm. They stand by the well, blackened by fire. A light infantryman reports that the water source is bubbling up from below, suggesting a massive underground river. Kan looks south thoughtfully. This river is the lifeblood of the desert, the reason his oasis exists at all. "By the way," Fatty's adds, "didn't you mention a natural salt mine nearby?" Kan's eyes sharpen. "I did, and there are gnolls there as well." "I think we'll be busy again soon," Fatty's remarks solemnly. Kan chuckles. "That's for sure. Those pure white salts are waiting for us." He is decisive. The Gnoll tribe is already ash. There is nothing left for him here. But the salt mine, that is an inexhaustible source of wealth, white gold that sells for its weight in silver. Continue the march, Can commands. The column moves out, 41 Swadian light infantry in a neat formation, followed by 46 heavy cavalry, their iron armor glinting in the sun. Saranid scouts lead the way as they follow the path trodden by gnolls toward the horizon. As dusk arrives, they reach the landmark, the mummified corpses of gnolls tied to wooden posts, casting long, terrifying shadows. Can charges straight up the dune. Below him, the remaining gnolls are frantic, packing bags of salt to flee. Can narrows his eyes. Among the rabble, he spots 30 gnolls wearing chainmail and wielding two-handed battle axes. The battle for the salt is about to begin. Can's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the salt mine below. It was a scene that defied logic. Gnolls were supposed to be uncivilized scavengers. Yet here stood 30 combatants, clad in high-grade chainmail and wielding gleaming two-handed battle axes. These were not the crude tools of a desert tribe. They were superior even to the gear Can had stripped from a gnoll chieftain. "They've spotted us," Fatties muttered, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. Can didn't order a charge. Instead, he leaned forward, squinting at a figure in the center of the pack. "Do you see that one, Fatties? The one in the linen robe?" Fatties frowned. It was bizarre. While most of the gnolls were acting as common laborers, hauling burlap sacks and using wooden rakes to gather coarse salt, this particular gnoll stood apart. He wore fine silk linen, the kind of fabric Can used for the curtains in his own chambers. "He looks like us," Fatties observed grimly. "Exactly," Can replied, his voice dropping to a cold, dangerous silk. "And they are occupying my salt mine. Fatties, prepare the heavy cavalry." 46 Swadian heavy cavalrymen formed two iron ranks atop the dune. Can handed Fatties the deterring presence a majestic banner featuring a golden lion against a crimson field. As the banner caught the wind, a system notification flashed across Can's vision. Temporary quest, seize the salt mine. The attack was absolute. The Swadian cavalry descended like an avalanche of steel. The 30 armored gnolls stood no chance. They were pierced through by 3-meter lances and impaled upon the white salt flats before they could even swing their axes. As the banner's aura of dread washed over the remaining laborers, their morale shattered. They fled into the sands, only to be run down by the relentless riders. Can descended the dune as the system chimed again, confirming his victory and awarding him 10 dromedary camels, the ships of the desert. At the edge of the blood-stained flats, Fatties approached, leading a group of dismounted knights. They dragged a prisoner in their wake. It was the gnoll in the silk robe, his head bowed in uncharacteristic submission. Can looked down from his horse, his interest piqued. "Tell me, do you understand the common tongue of humans?" The gnoll raised its head slightly, its voice a raspy whisper. "Of course, I understand a little." Asechi was more than just irritated. He was a gnoll on the brink of ruin. Anyone would be displeased to see their life's work, a painstakingly reopened desert trade route, facing total destruction. Especially this natural salt mine. It was his most profitable resource, the crown jewel of his investments. Thinking of the massive funds he had poured into this route, the bribes paid to a gnoll shaman to hire those dim-witted lesser gnolls as miners, Asechi felt a suffocating rage. He had liquidated every asset he owned in the Grey Mane Kingdom for this, 3,000 silver horns just for a 10-year-old military map. And 500 more every month to maintain the caravan. He had only been operating for a year, he hadn't even broken even. Asechi clenched his teeth, his oily green eyes turning a bloodshot crimson. "Those damned, inferior lesser gnolls," he howled, his voice tearing through the dry air. He delivered a brutal kick to a nearby miner, sending the creature whimpering into the sand. The other gnolls trembled. They knew Asechi had no mercy. "Lord Asechi, please calm yourself," a voice urged. Behind him stood his personal guards, high gnolls clad in heavy chainmail armor, clutching two-handed battle axes. "We must head back. Once the king's army arrives, this mine will be yours again." Asechi licked his lips, his anger cooling into a sharp, biting fear. The reports from the desert were terrifying. A human kingdom's heavy cavalry had returned to the Nalan Desert, elite troops that had wiped out a tribe of 2,000 gnolls with surgical speed. "Could they know?" Asechi whispered to himself. "Do the humans know the king plans to invade?" He looked at the bags of white rock salt. If he could just get this haul back to the Mannheim coast, he could claw back 1,000 silver horns. Fine, Asechi snapped. We go back, pack everything. By dusk, the caravan was ready. The twilight cast a golden, deceptive peace over the salt flats. Asechi looked at his mine one last time, a stray tear catching in his fur. 10,000 silver horns, gone. Lord Asechi, let us move, his guards urged.
Boo.
As Asechi turned to leave, a chorus of panicked shrieks erupted from the rear. He spun around, his heart dropping into his stomach. There, silhouetted against the setting sun atop the dunes, stood the nightmare. Human heavy cavalry. Their armor gleamed with a cold, lethal light. They didn't hesitate. As Asechi watched in frozen horror, the knights lowered their 3-meter lances and began their thunderous descent. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to kill. The battle at the salt mine was over. After the 30 armored knoll warriors were cut down, the remaining lesser knolls, clutching their hemp sacks of coarse salt, fled into the deep desert. Fatties watched them go, knowing that without water they were already dead men walking. Tightening his reins, Fatties brought his warhorse to a halt. Ahead, 10 Swadian heavy cavalry had surrounded a peculiar figure. It was a knoll, but one dressed in fine linen robes. He sat on the sand with his head bowed in surrender. Lord Fatties, one cavalryman called out, lifting his visor, this thing speaks our language, and quite well. The knoll, a merchant named Asechi, looked up with trembling eyes. He had watched his guards skewered like chicks by 3-meter lances, and his courage had evaporated. I am not a thing, he stammered in the human tongue. I am a civilized high knoll. Fatties remained unimpressed. Take him to Lord Cand. The cavalrymen grinned, bouncing their heavy maces in their palms. Will you walk, they growled, or shall we carry you? Asechi, remembering how those maces had burst Knoll's skulls like ripe fruit only minutes before, stood up instantly. I'll walk, he whispered. They brought him before Cand. The young lord sized up the prisoner, noting his refined clothing. You seem different from your beastly compatriots, Cand observed. Asechi felt a flicker of indignant pride. I am from the Grey Mane Kingdom on the Mannheim coast, north of the desert. We are a civilized race, unlike these mentally deficient beasts. Cand's brow furrowed, north of the desert, but the Nalan Desert is impassable. Only for humans, Asechi retorted, his voice rising with false bravado. My kingdom's army can cross the Devil's Zone. If you do not release me, they will march across the sands and pillage your lands. Cand and Fatties exchanged a look, and then they laughed. The calm, mocking sound chilled Asechi to the bone. Tie him up, Cand ordered. He is our friend after all. As the heavy ropes coiled around him, Asechi's defiance turned to pure terror. I will pay a ransom, 1,000 silver horns, he shrieked. A heavy mail boot to the ribs silenced him. As he was dragged away, Asechi looked at the sky in silent despair, praying only that the humans didn't intend to stew him for dinner. Asechi's upper body was bound tight with hemp rope, leaving only his feet free to shuffle across the sand. Surrounding him were 41 light infantrymen in chainmail armor, their hands resting ominously on the hilts of their Germanic swords. One wrong move, and they would strike. The knoll bowed his head in submission, casting one last, aggrieved glance at the salt-alkali land behind him. This dried-up lake, this white wasteland, no longer belonged to him. Tears welled in his wool fell. Ike eyes, even as a high knoll, he was now nothing more than a prisoner. But there was no time for self-pity. At Lord Cand's command, the Swadian forces, led by Cand and Fatties, repacked their gear and began the march back. They left the glistening piles of raw salt behind, abandoned at the edge of the desert. No one would steal it, the lesser knolls had been rooted, and the salt was useless until processed. Cand's mood was a storm of contradictions. On one hand, he had secured a high-quality salt mine. Once timber arrived from the mountains, he could produce fine white salt, a business as profitable as the spice trade. But on the other hand, his face darkened. The prisoner had brought news from the north. Beyond the desert lay the Grey Mane Kingdom, a nation ruled not by humans but by high knolls. This is really troublesome, Cand muttered, feeling a throb in his brow. His strategic rear base was no longer safe. It was now the potential front line between two hostile powers, the Lion Duchy and the Grey Mane Kingdom. Fatties, Cand called out. The commander rode parallel to him. I am here, Lord Cand. Do you believe the prisoner's story? Fatties nodded gravely. In the absence of intelligence, we must assume it is true. This knoll is different. He is groomed, intelligent, and understands the rules of power. We have a new enemy. Kan sighed. He was caught in the middle, a man standing between a greedy lion and a fierce wolf. If war broke out, the Sentry Oasis would be the first place both kingdoms would fight to occupy for its water. I will not hand over what I have built, Kan said, his voice hardening. Fatties, when we return, the development of the Sentry Oasis must accelerate. Kan spurred his horse forward. He had one advantage: time. He would use his salt to amass wealth, and that wealth to summon a Swadian army so terrifying that neither Duke nor Knoll would dare to challenge him. The plan remained the same, but now the clock was ticking. Night hung heavy in the sky, the Milky Way scattered like brilliant diamonds above the desert sands. Guided by the pale moonlight, Kan led his weary troops back to the ruins of the Knoll tribe, where their temporary camp still stood. After arranging sentries, the men collapsed into a deep sleep. They had survived the battle at the salt mine, but the desert offers no true rest. At dawn, the Swadian soldiers stirred. They woke in their armor, muscles aching and stiff, but no one complained. In this wasteland, taking off your mail is an invitation to death. Only the warhorses were granted relief, their heavy chainmail removed so they wouldn't collapse from exhaustion. Get busy, everyone, the order rang out. We are preparing to depart. As the sky turned gray, the camp was packed onto 3 carts. They had to move fast before the sun became a furnace. Kan stood by the ancient well, watching his men fill their water skins. This well was the only reason 2,000 Knolls had survived here. Fatties, Kan called out to his knight. Is there a way to block this well? I do not want the Knolls using it to threaten us again. Fatties paused, considering the request. Lord Kan, if we bury the well, we cannot station men at the salt mine. It is a 2-day journey from the oasis. Without this water, mining becomes impossible. Kan sighed, looking at the charred remains of the Knoll camp. Never mind then, few Knolls would dare return to this graveyard anyway. The order was given, prepare to depart. The journey home was a grueling day and night forced march. Kan pushed his men, eager to reach Sentry Oasis before the weekend when the new stone houses would be complete. By the afternoon of the second day, a sliver of green appeared on the horizon. Hundreds of date palms swayed in the distance, a lush, cooling emerald in a world of fire. Keep moving, Fatties shouted to the dust-covered ranks. We are home. The soldiers cheered, their voices hoarse but triumphant. Kan looked down at his village with pride. The cost of victory had been high. Of the 300 men who set out, fewer than 100 remained, but those who stood were no longer recruits. They were elite Swadian infantry and heavy cavalry, veterans of blood and sand. With 10,000 dinars in his coffers and 10 points of honor earned, Kan knew the system would reward his bravery. Sentry Oasis was no longer just a camp. It was a growing power, ready to claim the desert as its own. Kan led his weary troops towards Sentry Oasis, their silhouettes long and jagged against the desert sand. High atop the watchtower, construction workers clutching wooden sticks signaled their arrival. The stout construction foreman hurried from the ruler's hall, gathering his men to meet the returning lord at the edge of the oasis. He bowed low, his voice thick with practiced humility. Lord Kan, seeing you return safely, you must have achieved a brilliant victory. Kan raised a hand, his expression calm despite the layer of dust coating his skin. He looked at the newly built houses and felt a rare spark of satisfaction. Thank you, he replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. You've worked hard helping to keep watch while we were away. The foreman bowed incessantly, his mind already racing with the profit of a good impression. Kan, sensing the man's ambition, decided to reward the loyalty. In the future, Kan said, his lips dry and cracked, when there is work, I will hire you. The foreman's face lit up. Your kindness makes me feel as if I am bathed in holy light. Kan waved the flattery away, signaling his men to enter the village of Darum. They were exhausted living beings pushed to their absolute limits. Clean up the houses, Kan commanded the foreman. My soldiers need rest. The foreman moved with sudden urgency, assigning 92 soldiers to the 11 new Swadian houses. He even directed the cavalry to lead their 60th. Our horses into the shade of the date palm grove. Inside the ruler's hall, the foreman later reported to Kan and Fatties. "My lord, everything is arranged. The warriors are resting." "Well done," Can murmured. Fatties, his eyes shadowed by dark circles, offered a tired nod of thanks. The foreman vowed to keep watch through the night, but Cand, ever the strategist, knew he couldn't leave defense to laborers forever. "I will give you 100 dinars for your service," Cand stated, balancing grace with authority. Once the foreman retreated, Cand and Fatties finally succumbed to their fatigue. Upstairs, Cand stripped off his sand-heavy robes and collapsed into a deep, chaotic sleep. He dreamed of the Lion Duchy, of his father, and of a blonde, blue-eyed woman whose face remained a blur. He woke with a start, his throat parched. After gulping down cool spring water, he looked out the window. It was afternoon. Below, his infantry and heavy cavalry were already patrolling the streets in disciplined groups. Everything was as it should be. Can took a deep breath and focused his mind. "Open the system mall," he whispered. On his retina, a glowing treasure chest appeared, waiting for the cost of 1 honor point to reveal its secrets. Cand was no longer a stranger to the system mall's lottery. On his retina, a colorful treasure chest pulsed with infinite mystery. He subconsciously swallowed, his heart racing. As long as he chose to draw, consuming his hard-earned honor points, that chest would burst open in a shower of radiant light, bestowing grand gifts from the system. Cand possessed 10 points of honor, 10 chances to change his fate. He remembered the generous rewards of the past. System products were always top quality. Taking a steadying breath, he spoke, "Begin the draw." But just as his thoughts connected, a new prompt flickered into view. According to system rules, performing 10 consecutive draws grants an additional random gift package. Cand froze. It felt like the predatory marketing of an old online game, yet the inducement was perfect. His heart itched with anticipation. He nodded without hesitation. "Yes." Ding! The treasure chest creaked open, its light becoming dazzling. Dialogue boxes began to pop up in a rapid-fire blur. "Ding! You have obtained an item gift package. Inside, a page of fertile soil. Ding! A page of clear spring. Ding! A sun disk." Cand frowned. The names were hauntingly familiar, but the system didn't stop. Ding! Building gift packages appeared: a desert bandit camp, a training ground, a stone wall, and a sugar workshop. Then a golden card materialized. Ding! A hero gift package. Inside stood Manite, a skilled merchant from a Nord family. Cand's eyes lit up. This draw was becoming legendary. Next came the military supplies, hunting crossbows and army rations. The flurry paused, but Cand waited, breathless. There was still the bonus. Ding! The final package op. Ned 20 Ravenston Rangers. Cand's 10 honor points vanished, but he didn't care. His fatigue was gone, replaced by an explosive excitement. "I've struck it rich," he whispered, his hands clenching. The losses from his recent battle had been compensated 100-fold. He called up the 3 curios. They were the very items he had seized from the Knoll tribe, now purified by the system. The 2 book pages held the power to summon elemental giants, though they remained uncontrollable and hostile. But it was the sun disk that truly mesmerized him. It could regulate temperature, absorbing the desert heat by day and releasing it by night. Cand looked at the golden disk at his feet, brand new and shimmering. "Temperature regulation?" he murmured. "No, this is manipulating the power of the sun itself." He finally understood how a city of gold could survive in the heart of the wastes. This wasn't just luck, it was the power of a lost civilization. The desert was a merciless furnace, a land where excessive sunlight and blistering heat made settlement nearly impossible. Cand looked down at the sun disk, finally understanding how the lost city of the Nalan Desert became the legendary Golden Holy City. Its power could regulate the very climate itself. But his brow furrowed as he read the data on his retina. The effect only covered 500 square meters. His village, Darum, was already twice that size, not even counting the spring, the 7 acres of wheat, or the date palms. "The range is too small," Cand muttered. He had imagined the disk shielding the entire oasis, ensuring his wheat sprouts wouldn't be scorched to death the moment they broke the soil. Suddenly, a system prompt chimed. The curios were damaged, fragmented. They could be repaired to unlock their full potential, but the system offered no instructions, only the frustrating command to explore the methods on your own. Cand shook his head with a bitter smile. "A real headache," he sighed. Yet as the disk absorbed the afternoon sun, the sweltering room began to cool. It was no longer a steamer. In a desert where noon temperatures hit 70 degrees Celsius, turning men into dried corpses in minutes, this small comfort was a godsend, at least now. He could sleep without waking in a sweat. He took a sip of water and scrolled through his new building packs. The list was promising: a desert bandit camp for rapid recruitment, a training ground to sharpen his troops, and a 5-meter-high stone wall. A smile touched his lips. With a wall, Darum would be invincible. No enemy could endure a siege in this waterless waste. They would die of thirst long before the gates broke. But Kand wasn't rushing to build. He knew the news of his salt trade would soon draw greedy nobles and bandits alike. He had to plan the expansion carefully. Then his eyes lit up: a sugar workshop. In this world, sugar was a luxury as precious as spice. By processing his dates into sugar, ND could dominate the markets of the Lion Duchy. He just needed the right man to lead the trade. Kand crushed a mental card into golden light. Far off, beyond the dunes, a figure appeared on a heavy sumpter horse. It was Manhwa, a professional merchant from the Nord Kingdom. As the Serenid riders escorted the newcomer toward the village, Kand looked down from his window. "Fatties," Kand called out to his commander below, "go greet Manhwa. He is our new caravan leader." Fatties looked up, surprised. "The handsome merchant, I remember him well." Kand nodded, watching the horizon. The pieces were falling into place: salt, sugar, and steel. The desert was finally beginning to yield. Kand watched from his window as Manhwa approached on a heavy pack horse. He finished his water and turned to Fatties with a steady gaze. "Talk to him about the salt mine," Kand instructed. "I want to hear his thoughts when I meet him." Fatties bowed his head. "Understood, Lord Kand." Trusting the night completely, Kand returned to his table. He sipped more water, trying to stay hydrated in the desert heat while his eyes focused on the glowing interface only he could see. The list of rewards was thinning out. He had drawn 2 military rations. The first, a hunting crossbow pack, equipped his Swadian recruits with standard ranged weapons. Kand felt a flicker of indifference. He knew these crossbows well. They were lethal only within 50 meters. Against armored foes, they were practically useless, but against the unarmored gnolls, they were decent enough. The second ration was far more practical: bread. Each soldier would receive 1 portion, which, when sliced and mixed with other food, could last 3 days. It was a relief, yet a new shadow crossed Kand's mind: fodder. His 46 armored Swadian warhorses were elite beasts. They couldn't survive on scraps. They needed fine fodder, nutritious dates, and fresh alfalfa. A single warhorse ate as much as 3 men. "A difficult problem," he whispered, pinching the bridge of his nose. But the final troop pack changed everything. 20 Ravenston Rangers. Kand's breath hitched. These were level 5 troops, top-tier archers from the dense forests of Pender. Unlike the rapid-fire Vigir sharpshooters, these rangers were masters of stability. Every shot was a headshot. Every arrow took a life. They were his first elite units, and they would turn his city walls into a fortress. He felt a surge of greed, wishing for legendary knights, but he quickly shook it off with a chuckle. "I am being insatiable," he admitted. 20 masters of the bow were more than enough. Finally, Kand looked at his last remaining resource: 1 single point of honor. He didn't want to wait for a 10 draw. He needed strength *, now *. "System," he commanded, "perform a draw." A treasure chest appeared, blooming with multicolored light. It trembled, then snapped open. "Ding, you have obtained an item pack." Kand leaned in, his heart hammering against his ribs as the text solidified on his retina. "Obtained terrain modification, lake." Kand stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. "Terrain modification," he muttered into the quiet room. "What is this?" Inside the quiet room of the ruler's hall, a golden card flickers within Kand's mind. It bears no pattern, only a pulsing ball of light composed of countless tiny symbols. Kand's breathing quickens. He recognizes these marks, the ancient magical patterns of mages, remnants of a glorious, lost civilization. His mouth goes dry as he opens the system dialog. There, a new description appears: terrain modification, small lake. It is a power of pure creation, capable of shaping a body of water 80 meters long, 30 meters wide, and 2 meters deep. "Everything as one wishes," he whispers. Kand makes his decision: use, terrain modification. Instantly, his consciousness surges upward 20 meters into the air. From this god's eye view, the vast, golden sea of the Nalan Desert stretches toward the distant Sanvia Mountains. Below him lies Sentry Oasis, his village neatly divided by a narrow spring. With a thought, he begins to build. He selects the desert bandit camp and watches as the existing stronghold is enveloped in a stream of glowing data, expanding into a massive 500-square-meter fortress. Next, he places a sugar workshop on the western bank, followed by a sprawling 2,000-square-meter training ground to the east. The sandy earth groans as it is paved over with heavy stone and brick. Then the final act. Cand activates the terrain modification card. A surge of mysterious, rule-bending power spreads across the western sands. The earth begins to depress and shift, soil and stone forming a basin as clear groundwater bubbles up from the depths. A lake emerges, sparkling under the desert sun. Aquatic plants sway at the bottom, and small fish dart through the new, transparent depths. "So beautiful," he murmurs. Suddenly, his consciousness plummets. Can blinks, finding himself back in his chair on the second floor of the ruler's hall, a water cup still held to his lips. He drains the cup in one long gulp, his weariness replaced by a soaring spirit. The system's power has reshaped his world. Now it is time to see it with his own eyes. Downstairs, his caravan leader Manhwa is waiting, but outside, a new Sentry Oasis has been born. The sun began its slow descent over Sentry Oasis, casting a shimmering glow across the clear waters of the lake. The sweltering heat of noon had faded, replaced by a refreshing coolness that clung to the air, a gift perhaps from the mysterious sun disk mounted atop the watchtower. Lord Can strolled along the lakeside, his footsteps mirrored by his two companions, the noble knight Fatties and the eloquent merchant Manhwa. The atmosphere was light, filled with the easy harmony of newfound allies. Manhwa, a man of sharp wit from the Ord Kingdom, looked out over the water with a sigh of genuine emotion. "My lord," he remarked softly, "this is a miracle. It reminds me of the great Shara's Oasis." Can chuckled, shaking his head. "Shariz is a capital of prosperity and power. We are not there yet." "But the shadow of that greatness is already here," Manhwa countered with a polished smile. It was the perfect flattery, appealing to the pride Can felt for carving a foothold into the harsh Nalan desert. Can turned to the handsome merchant, his expression turning serious. "Manhwa, from this day forward you are my caravan leader. You will manage all commercial affairs. I trust your professionalism." Manhwa bowed deeply. "I shall do my utmost, my lord." As they walked toward the north side, the scent of dinner drifted from the kitchens. Cand wrinkled his nose playfully, admitting the fare was humble, but Manhwa merely shrugged. "Ideals are more important than the palate, my lord. Is that not right, Sir Fatties?" The knight nodded solemnly, his mind fixed on justice rather than luxury. However, Can's thoughts remained on the practical. "Manhwa, tell me, what is your take on the salt trade?" "High risk, high reward," Manhwa replied. He explained his vision. They would not venture into the Lion Duchy themselves. Instead, they would find an agent, a middleman to bear the brunt of the political and physical risks. "Let them deal with the nobles and the bandits," Manhwa suggested with a chuckle. "We provide the salt, they provide the shield." Can laughed, impressed by the merchant's cunning. "Sometimes I forget you are a Nord. I thought your people only knew how to swing axes." "Plunder must be sold eventually, my lord," Manhwa joked. They circled back toward the training grounds where Swadian heavy cavalry sparred with light infantry. Can watched his elite troops with a quiet, fierce confidence. If any bandits dared to cross 7 days of desert to reach this oasis, they would find no mercy, only steel and a long, thirsty road to the grave. The banquet was a celebration of total victory. On the long tables, simple rations, bread, dried meat, and dates had been transformed into a feast that filled every stomach with the quiet happiness of plenty. There was no ale to be found, but it didn't matter. The men held their wooden bowls high, pretending the cool spring water was fine beer, laughing as they traded stories of battlefield heroics, and mocking those who had nearly wet their pants when the steel began to clash. The construction workers who had stayed behind watched with eyes full of envy and awe. They knew the truth. The battlefield is the only place to prove a man's worth, where sword meets sword and the boundary between the living and the dead is drawn in blood. "Fill your bellies," Can shouted, his face flushed with pride. He raised his cup to the soldiers lining the street. "For victory, for the future, bottoms up." "Long live the soldiers!" roared in unison, draining their water as if it were the finest wine. Can exhaled contentedly, though he whispered to Fatties and Manhwa that they must soon buy proper malt ale. Fatties offered a soft, disciplined smile. Can nodded. He knew the sentry oasis stood alone. One wrong step meant a fall into a bottomless cliff. Even now, 20 Ravenston Rangers stood watch. From the towers and rooftops, their heavy bows were ready, their eyes scanning the moonlit sands for any shadow of a threat. As the night deepened, the celebration wound down. The soldiers, still sober and sharp, cleared the tables. The Rangers were relieved by high-spirited Swadian light infantry, and Cand finally retired to the ruler's hall for a deep, well-earned sleep. High atop the watchtower, the sun disk began to glow. Mysterious runes pulsed with a golden light, regulating the desert chill into a gentle warmth. But beneath that glow, something strange occurred. A surge of data streams, like a digital dam, intercepted the light, forcing it back into the stone. Far away in the heart of the Nalan Desert, a place so scorched that even gnolls dare not tread, a faint, matching golden light rose through the dunes. It reached toward the stars, searching for a connection, before flickering out and sinking back into the silent, shifting sands. Cand was jolted from a deep sleep by the urgent sound of palms slapping against his wooden door. A rough voice echoed through the corridor. "Lord, wake up quickly." Still groggy, Cand suppressed his irritation. "Stop knocking," he called out. "If you break the door, you'll pay for it in dinar." He threw off his wool blanket, dressed in haste, and pulled open the door to find a light infantryman trembling with a mix of embarrassment and raw excitement. "What happened?" Cand asked, shaking his head. "An attack." "No, my lord," the soldier gasped. "We discovered a large group of desert antelope. They are migrating right past us." Cand stared, his brain still sluggish. Desert antelope in this godforsaken place? He rubbed his face, wondering if it was an April Fool's joke, but he followed the soldier down the stairs regardless. Inside the ruler's hall, a burly Swadian heavy cavalryman stood guard, nodding respectfully as Cand passed. Outside, the streets were strangely empty, but a massive crowd had gathered near the sugar workshop on the west side. Swadian infantry, Saranid riders, and Ravenston Rangers were all huddled together, blocking the path. Cand pushed through the throng to find his advisors, Fatties and Manide, watching the horizon with bright, alert eyes. "Is it true?" Cand asked. "See for yourself, my lord," Fatties replied, pointing toward the shimmering lake. Cand stepped forward and his eyes widened in disbelief. So many. Thousands of agile, spirited antelope were gathered at the water's edge. They were beautiful creatures, pale yellow fur marked by a sharp black line running down their spines. Spiraled horns like swords piercing the sky. "They came from the Sanvea Mountains," Fatties explained. "We've seen small groups all morning, but nothing like this." Cand frowned, but why come deep into the desert? There must be something drawing them in. Manide stepped forward, his tone thoughtful. "I believe it is salt, my lord. These creatures need to replenish their minerals. They are likely using Sentry Oasis as a waypoint to reach the natural salt mines deep in the wastes." He smiled at Cand. "This is a rare opportunity to accumulate food and leather." Cand's expression shifted from shock to a calculating grin. He turned to the Ravenston Rangers standing ready behind him. "Well then, let's not let them pass empty-handed. Fresh meat is always better than dried rations." The desert sun beat down on the Sentry Oasis, where a massive herd of desert antelope gathered to drink. To Cand, they weren't just wildlife, they were fresh meat. He turned to his Ravenston Rangers, Tier 5 marksmen for whom this task was a mere formality. "This is simple," he noted. The 20 Rangers nodded, their expressions stoic as they drew their heavy bows. The bowstrings stretched into elegant arcs, knocking specialized bodkin arrows. With calm precision they released. Whoosh, 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 the arrows sliced through the air like lightning. In a heartbeat, 20 antelope collapsed by the water's edge. The shots were surgical, piercing the eyes to destroy the brain instantly, leaving the valuable hides untouched. As blood dyed the pond red, the rest of the herd, driven by sudden, frantic instinct, scattered into the vast sea of sand. "My lord, it is done," the Rangers reported, as calm as if they had merely been practicing. Cand smiled, instructing his Swadian light infantry to collect the carcasses. He could already smell the roasted lamb, crispy, dripping with oil, and seasoned with salt. It was a welcome reprieve from the monotony of dried meat. Suddenly, a system prompt flickered across Cand's vision. Temporary mission: hunt 50 desert antelope. Reward: 5 acres of wild wheatgrass beach. Cand hesitated, watching the last of the herd vanish, but a sentry's shout from the watchtower changed everything. Attention, another batch is coming. These migrations from the Sanvia Mountains were a monthly necessity for the salt-starved creatures. Can didn't hesitate this time. I need 50 to stay. The Rangers drew again. Within minutes, the quota was met. The system chimed, confirming the mission's success and granting Cand a digital card representing the grass beach. This wasn't just greenery, it was a solution to his greatest logistical headache, horse fodder. With a thought, Cand activated the reward. Data streams shimmered across the west side of the lake, transforming the barren sand into 5 acres of lush, green wild wheat grass. The stalks grew tall and hardy, providing perfect grazing for his Swadian warhorses and stabilizing the descent. RT soil. As small birds fluttered from the date palms to investigate the new meadow, Cand looked on with satisfaction. The oasis was no longer just a stopover, it was becoming a stronghold. The wild wheatgrass beach was lush and stubborn, a 5-mu expanse of green swaying against the desert sands. From the distant dunes, panicked desert antelope would often dive into the thicket, mistaking the vegetation for a safe haven. Watching them, Cand shook his head with a helpless smile. Cute but foolish, he murmured. He turned to his companion, Man-Eyed, wondering aloud if the creatures could be domesticated. Man-Eyed remained skeptical. While possible, he argued, the wild antelope offered little value compared to sheep or goats. Their wool was sparse and they yielded no milk for cheese. They were better suited as prey than livestock. Accepting this, Cand clapped his hands, signaling his soldiers to return to their duties. Skin them, he commanded, gesturing to the day's hunt piled near the sugar workshop. We eat fresh meat today, the rest becomes jerky. As the village of Darum hummed with activity, Cand's mind turned to the future. A new week had begun, bringing with it the harsh reality of the system's financial report. With no taxes yet collected and over 2,000 dinars paid out in military wages, the settlement was a drain on his resources. To survive, he needed a caravan. Relying on system merchants for tools was a waste of precious dinars. A single bag of salt could buy 100 hoes in the markets of the Lion Duchy. Determined to progress, Cand looked to his golden upgrade card, but the system issued a prompt. He could not upgrade the village until all basic structures were complete. He still lacked a mill, a city wall, and a well. At first, Cand balked. A mill was useless without a harvest, and a well seemed redundant in an oasis. But then, a flash of inspiration struck. He looked at the post station in his building queue. If he built the station as a transit point for his future salt trade, he could pair it with the well. System, Cand inquired, can I build a well next to a post station? Yes, the system replied, provided there is an underground water vein. Cand's eyes gleamed. The well was no longer a useless requirement, it was the key to a strategic bridgehead. By combining the two, he would create a vital outpost, a sanctuary for his caravans, and a watchful eye turned toward the Lion Duchy. Cand stood at the edge of the oasis, his mind racing with the logistics of expansion. To upgrade the village, only 3 buildings remained, a mill, a wall, and a well. The cost was a mere 400 dinar, but the construction time was a problem. Between them, 28 days would be lost, nearly a full month. Cand could not wait. The salt trade and the vast profits it promised had to be launched within the week. System, he thought, is there a way to build faster? The reply was immediate, he could consume 100 prestige to reduce construction by a single day, or he could build multiple structures simultaneously by paying an extra 100 dinar labor fee per building. Cand's lips curled into a smile. Thanks to recent quest rewards, he had over 10,000 dinar in his coffers. Piece of cake, he muttered. He immediately ordered the construction of the mill to the east of the spring. Though currently useless for grain, it would serve as a vital warehouse. Next, he commissioned a stone wall to enclose the barley fields and date palms, not for defense against armies, but to keep the desert antelope from grazing on his precious crops. The system calculated the toll, 200 dinar for the mill, 100 for the wall, and a 200 dinar surcharge for simultaneous labor. To ensure everything was finished within 7 days, Cand spent 700 prestige to slash the mill's duration in half. Confirm, he commanded. He knew that once these were complete, the village would upgrade. He would have to choose between a military fortress or an economic town. For Cand, the choice was clear. Political power grows from the barrel of a gun. He would build a stronghold. Dust rose on the horizon as 200 workers and 10 loaded carriages appeared behind the dunes. The fat construction foreman returned, his face beaming at the prospect of new gold. With the labor underway, Cand returned to the ruler's hall and summoned his advisors, Manhwa and Fatties. The development of Century Oasis is steady, Cand told them. Manhwa, you will accompany me to the Lion Duchy to open the salt trade. Fatties, you will hold the Oasis. Manhwa hesitated, concerned they lacked agents in the duchy, but Cand waved the concern away. He already had a target in mind, the Barren of Jianxi Pass. The pass was a fortress of solid stone, the only gateway through the mountains, and the baron who held it was notoriously poor. Cand's eyes glinted with ambition. It was time to show the baron the true meaning of profit. Cand tapped his fingers lightly against the tabletop, his brow furrowed in deep thought. His own safety was never a small matter, and the mission ahead required a delicate balance of strength and discretion. I will lead this operation myself, he declared. After a moment's pause, he added, let the 5 Saranid riders and 10 desert bandits act as my guards to Jianxi Pass. Fatties, the ever-cautious knight, frowned with concern. My lord, shouldn't we bring more men, perhaps 10 Swadian heavy cavalry? Their presence alone would deter those with ill intentions. Cand shook his head with a mocking smile. No, they are too conspicuous. He glanced at the 2 heavy cavalrymen guarding the door, monolithic figures in iron plate and chainmail, their warhorses draped in steel. They were beacons in the night, and in the Lion Duchy, such elite equipment was reserved for the high nobility. We are going to trade, Cand sighed. Earring as a military threat will only provoke the warrior nobles, those impulsive men who earn their titles through blood and have no patience for outsiders. Fatties reluctantly nodded. He understood the danger. The road to Jianxi Pass was treacherous, not from desert monsters but from the desperate peasants of the North County. In the off-season, these farmers turned into ruthless bandits to survive the barren, desertified landscape. Cand's plan was clear. He was scouting a path, testing the waters of the duchy without diving into its man-eating whirlpool of politics. He would find an agent, establish the salt trade, and retreat to the safety of the sands. Before departing, Cand meticulously organized the Century Oasis. He handed full authority to Fatties, trusting the knight's wisdom to manage the diverse personalities of the troops. He knew that even system-recruited soldiers were living, breathing men with their own frictions. A single leadership error could invite disaster. In the quiet of the afternoon, Cand finalized his preparations. He spent 300 dinars to recruit 10 new desert bandits and materialized 10 dromedary camels, the ships of the desert. These hardy beasts would be the lifeblood of his future empire, hauling salt and charcoal across the scorching dunes. Everything was ready. Cand looked out over the horizon, waiting for the dawn to begin his journey. The next day, at the first light of dawn, Cand stood at the street corner, his luggage packed and his breakfast finished. Manhwa waited for him, flanked by a formidable escort. 5 Saranid riders clad in chainmail and linen robes stood like statues, their presence alone keeping the 10 unruly desert bandits in check. While the bandits were masters of harassment and javelins, the Saranid riders were true assault cavalry, the hammer of the desert. It seems you are all ready, Cand noted with a satisfied nod. Then let us set off early. Safe travels, my lord, Fatties and the soldiers of Century Oasis called out. Even the 200 construction workers paused their labor to watch him go. Cand was more than a leader, he was the very foundation of their hope. With a final wave, he shook the reins and rode forward. The journey was brutal. By noon, the sun was a physical weight. One Saranid rider pulled alongside Cand, his voice steady despite the heat. My lord, it is nearly midday. We must find the shady side of a dune. In the desert, speed is nothing without stamina. Cand licked his dry lips and nodded. I agree, let us rest. They found a massive dune and carved out a temporary camp in its shadow, digging into the cool sand to escape the glare. They ate simply bread, dried meat, and dates, waiting 2 hours for the sun to lose its bite before pushing on. By dusk, the horses were snorting with fatigue. Manhwa, a merchant unused to such long hours in the saddle, slumped forward, his legs stiff and aching. Cand watched him with concern. Are you all right, Manhwa? I will manage, the merchant replied with a bitter smile. They pushed through the night, the desert turning from a furnace into a freezer. Under a brilliant, cloudless moon, Cand breathed out plumes of white mist. His body was freezing, his throat parched. How long? He rasped. "It is nearly dawn, my lord," a rider replied. "We have covered more than half the distance." Can closed his eyes, reaching out to the system in his mind. "Can I build a well here?" "No," the system countered. "There are no water veins. However, 3 li ahead an underground lake exists. A well can be built there." A faint blue line appeared on Can's retina, cutting through the silver sands. He swallowed hard, finding a new spark of strength. "Move out," he commanded. 3 li to the south, we find water." The system cannot. Following the light blue path, Can and his men arrived at a stretch of flat, frozen sand. Can tightened his reins, his face pale from the biting cold, but his eyes burned with intensity. "This is the place," he whispered. The system's indicator stopped right beneath his feet, signaling that a hidden underground lake lay deep below. A crisp chime echoed in his head, *ding*, followed by a prompt. The cost, 200 dinar. In an instant, the sound of clinking metal coins rang out and lime powder appeared out of thin air, outlining a half-meter circle on the sand. Can felt a wave of relief. The well was small, too small for an invading army to utilize, but perfect for a weary traveler. In this fluid desert sand, any attempt by an enemy to sabotage or re-excavate it would only lead to a total collapse. Next, Can activated a rare card, Build a Post Station. A stream of shimmering data erupted, and suddenly a 2-story stone and wood building stood before them. It was a sturdy Swadian structure, complete with a rooftop balcony for scouts. "We sleep inside tonight," Can said, a smile finally breaking through his weary expression. Manhwa, the young merchant, nodded gratefully while shivering in the bone-chilling air. The Serenid soldiers cheered, quickly rushing inside to light a roaring fire in the hearth. As the warmth of the pine oil torches filled the hall, the men began to relax, but the peace was short-lived. Suddenly, the desert bandits reached for their scimitars, their eyes fixed on the door, footsteps heavy and rhythmic. "Who is it?" a rider barked, raising his shield. "Respected Serenid lords, don't be impulsive," a trembling voice cried out from the darkness. 10 men in linen robes appeared, leaning on shovels and pulling a supply carriage. It was the construction team from the city of Veruga, sent by the system to finish the well. As the workers settled in, the foreman recognized Manhwa, sparking a brief moment of levity about the merchant's reputation with the ladies of the Rodok Mountains. But then, the foreman's expression turned serious. He reached into his tunic and produced a sealed parchment. "Lord Can," the foreman said respectfully, "the father of Fatties learned his son was in your service. He entrusted me to deliver this family letter to the Knight Fatties." The construction foreman's face was etched with sincerity as he handed over the thin parchment. Can stood stunned, wondering why a noble from Suna would send a family letter via a construction crew from the distant Rodok kingdom. Suddenly, a system notification flickered across his vision. "Temporary quest, Fatties' family letter. Reward, troop recruitment doubling." Can sighed softly as the realization hit him. This wasn't just a letter, it was the desperate reach of a gray-haired father for his wayward son. Fatties, the noble knight, had fled into exile after accidentally killing his brother. Now his father was in his twilight years, yearning for his only remaining heir to return. "I will deliver this," Can promised, tucking the letter against his chest. The foreman bowed deeply, relieved to have avoided the wrath of a noble. As night draped a thin veil over the desert, Can retreated to the second floor of the post station. While his men slept, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind was a storm of doubt. If he gave Fatties this letter, would the knight abandon the Oasis to reclaim his inheritance? In the game, characters were mere data, but here, in the real world, Fatties had a soul. Can considered burning it. Even a permanent recruitment bonus couldn't replace a general of Fatties' caliber. Troublesome, he whispered into the dark, but he knew Fatties was a man of principle, and Can was a pragmatist. At dawn, the smell of toasted bread and dried meat filled the air. Can led his party out, leaving the builders to their work. They rode toward the horizon where the Sandvia Mountains rose like a sleeping dragon. By dusk, the desert was dyed a deep, bruised gold. Ahead, a massive rift appeared in the mountain range, a canyon carved, as legends say, by the wrath of gods. This was the only passage to the Lion Duchy. "We have arrived," Can announced, his voice tight with anticipation. They navigated the canyon floor, picking through debris and fallen timber. Then, rising from the shadows of the cliffs, the stone walls of Giantshi Pass appeared. It was a rugged fortress of rock and timber, the final gateway between the shifting sands and the world of men. Cand gripped his reins, the weight of the letter still heavy against his heart. Asechi stood by the lakeside at Sentry Oasis, staring blankly at the water. It didn't remember a lake being here, but it didn't dare think too much about it. A sharp chill ran down its spine, making its gray fur damp with cold sweat. Behind the 2-meter-tall knoll stood 2 elite Swadian heavy cavalry, expressionless, clad in fine armor, their chainmail-encased hands resting near the heavy maces at their belts. "Hey, what are you standing there like an idiot for?" one soldier growled. Displeased at having to look up at the tall creature, the human slammed an iron-reinforced boot into the back of Asechi's leg. Yes, I'm going." Asechi fell to its knees, offering no resistance. This was its 30-minute exercise time, a tactic used by its captor Cand to break its psychological defenses. Escape was impossible. Asechi still had nightmares of these humans on their armored warhorses, effortlessly crushing its hired warriors in the dunes. As a merchant from the Grey Mane Kingdom, Asechi prayed to the Storm Monarch for hope, but it knew the deity's power didn't reach this far into the Nalan Desert. It thought of the brewing war. How High Knolls, the Lizardman Kingdom, and the Elf Republic were all eyeing the human lands to the south. A soldier barked, shoving Asechi forward. The Knoll's brief hope vanished, replaced by the cold reality that its life remained in someone else's hands. Meanwhile, at the Sanvea Mountains, Cand arrived at Jianshi Pass. He looked up at the 6-meter-high walls and scoffed. The defenses were laughably lax, the arrow towers were empty, and not a single soul was on watch. "My lord, should we knock?" a Saranid rider asked. "Knock," Cand replied with a mocking smirk. "Make it loud." The rider dismounted and kicked the wooden gate with heavy, rhythmic thuds. Thud, thud, thud. Panic erupted from within. "Are the Knolls attacking?" voices cried out. Finally, 30 terrified militiamen, barely more than children, scrambled onto the wall. "Lacks defense," Cand muttered. "They are just like a group of militia." As more professional reinforcements arrived on the battlements, Cand remained unfazed. He signaled to his companion, Manhwa, "Tell them that Baron Cand of the Nalan Desert wishes to enter, and that I have important matters to discuss with Baron Dylan." Cand did not have to wait long. About 10 minutes later, a burly figure appeared atop the city wall, Baron Dylan of North County. His face was a map of scars, and his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. Below the wall, Manhwa looked up, his expression solemn. As a man of merchant blood, Manhwa knew how to read people. This Baron was no playboy, he was a man in his prime, yet something was wrong. Manhwa scanned the panicked peasants and the poor state of the wall's defenses. On the chaotic continent of Calradia, a pass this poorly guarded wouldn't last a single day. "Don't think too much," Cand whispered, sensing his companion's doubt. A strange smile played on Cand's lips. He understood the Baron's coldness. It stretched back 10 years, to a battle the Lion Duchy still brooded over, the very battle that had led to Cand's exile. Cand exhaled deeply and kicked his horse forward. "Uncle Dylan," he called out, looking up at the wall, "it is a pleasure to meet you again." Silence followed. The expected response did not come. Behind Cand, his Saranid riders and desert bandits grew indignant. To them, this silence was a grave insult to their lord, but Cand remained sincere. He bowed his head slightly. "I was granted the Nalan Desert last month. Now that my territory has stabilized, I have come to visit after all." Finally, Dylan's eyes flickered. "Open the city gate," he commanded. As the heavy log gates creaked open, Dylan descended. He showed no warmth. Instead, he pointed to the peasants who had sounded the false alarm. "Give them 10 lashes, he ordered coldly. "If it happens again, hang them." The air filled with the slap-slap of whips and miserable screams. Dylan ignored it all, mounting his horse and riding away, when his butler asked if a banquet should be prepared for the young Baron. Dylan replied bluntly, "No need, just prepare more food." Cand and his men entered the pass on foot, following the butler through the narrow, filthy streets. The town was a place of stench and squalor. Sallow-faced peasants watched them with envy, their eyes fixed on the clean, noble appearance of Cand's company. Cand frowned as his leather boots squelched in the black mud and sewage. This was Jianshi Pass, a fortress of stone, shadow, and a bitterness that ran deeper than the canyon itself. Cand had once stayed at an inn within Jianshi Pass, but he had never truly stepped outside its walls. As a noble and an ennobled baron, he was accustomed to the comforts of a carriage, leaving the procurement of supplies to the Swadian peasants. But now, as dawn approached, he prepared to enter the Nalan desert. Can looked toward the steward leading the way. The middle-aged man seemed indifferent to the filth, unbothered even as his boots splashed into stagnant, murky puddles. Can, raised in the pristine halls of the academy and the well-maintained lion castle, carefully dodged the sewage. Even his new settlement, Sentry Oasis, was exceptionally clean by comparison. Once fully inside the pass, Can swung onto his horse. Behind him, Manhwa and the escorting cavalry mounted as well, their brows furrowed at the sight of dilapidated shanties and ragged paupers. This world of swords and magic felt painfully similar to the wretched conditions of medieval Europe. The steward, now mounted on a thin, old horse, looked back with a humble grin. His eyes lingered on the majestic Saranid warhorses. "They are top tier," the man exclaimed. "Only Lion Castle would have such beasts, right?" Cand remained aloof. "As long as they are fed well," he replied indifferently, "they are top tier." The steward nodded quickly, sensing the crushing weight of class. Cand was, after all, a son of Cameron. The blood of a lion flowed in his veins. As they moved deeper into the fortress, the scenery shifted. Stone and timber houses replaced the shanties. These were the taxpayers, the citizens. They watched the procession with envy, their eyes widening as the wind caught the linen robes of the 5 Saranid riders, revealing the glimmer of iron chainmail beneath. However, in the shadows, emaciated figures watched with grave expressions. They exchanged silent glances, pulled up their hoods, and vanished into a hidden basement. Deep underground, they approached a man writing with a quill. "My lord," the leader bowed, "Baron Cand has arrived. He has 16 men, 5 in iron armor." The quill paused, a drop of ink bled into the paper. "Heh, to think he didn't die in the desert," the man murmured. He dismissed his spies and stared into the flickering candlelight. "Interesting," he whispered. "After Princess Sophia died 16 years ago, how much of her power remains?" He was speaking of Can's mother, the late Duchess of the Sea. Elver Plate Kingdom, who had died so very long ago. The butler led the way through the winding streets until Can and his party stood before the residence of Baron Dillon. Can's eyebrows twitched as he surveyed the structure. It was less a house and more a small, exquisite castle, built of solid stone against a sheer cliffsea. A retractable wooden bridge suspended by heavy chains connected it to the city walls 3 meters above the standard walkway. With its tall arrow towers and narrow, defensible entrance, the message was clear. This was a fortress designed to hold out for months. Manhwa sighed and Can shook his head. They finally understood why the Baron dismissed the northern defenses. If the gnolls ever breached the pass, the nobility could simply retreat here, abandon the civilians, and wait for reinforcements in total safety. "Please enter, Lord Cand," the chubby butler urged, bowing low. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Unlike the sallow-faced conscripts outside, the guards here were sturdy, clad in well-fitted leather armor. They watched Can's escort with visible apprehension. The 5 Saranid riders and 10 desert bandits were clearly battle-hardened elites, not mere caravan guards. While the bandits took the horses to the stables, the 5 riders followed Can inside as bodyguards. They left their spears and shields behind, but kept their curved swords at their hips. The butler, knowing that asking a nobleman of the Lion Duchy to disarm was a grave insult, wisely said nothing. They were led into a dim, stone-paved hall spanning 200 square meters. 10 massive pillars supported the ceiling, framing a long table capable of seating 30. "Baron Dillon is delayed," the butler stammered. "Please sit, I will fetch fresh water." As the butler hurried away, Can gestured to his men. "Sit and rest, you've earned it." Manhwa looked around with a nostalgic shrug. "It's not much different from the halls of Calradia, just smaller." Suddenly Manhwa stiffened. "Someone is coming." Heavy boots thudded in the corridor. Loud, mocking voices carried through the thin doors. "Baron Cand, that little exiled fellow," a voice jeered. "I want to see if he's come to take refuge after wetting his pants in the desert." The doors swung open. A dozen burly, unruly men swaggered in, but their laughter died instantly. They found themselves staring into the cold, murderous eyes of the 5 Saranid riders. The riders sat with their iron helmets on the table, their hands resting on their sword hilts. The silver glint of mail armor peeking from beneath their robes signaled they were ready for slaughter. The intruders froze, they were unarmored and unarmed. The silence in the hall became deafening. Without turning his head, Kan's voice rang out with icy calm. "This is dinner time, sit down and behave." The riders withdrew their gazes, and the boisterous men, now pale and silent, hurriedly took their seats, the weight of the Saranids' killing intent still hanging heavy in the air. A strange, heavy atmosphere filled the hall, yet it was unusually quiet. A dozen burly men, the vassal knights of Giantshi Pass, glanced at each other with wary eyes. They watched the 5 Saranid riders who sat with a discipline never before seen in this barren North Count. "Why?" Kan remained silent, sitting steadily alongside Manhwa. They were, after all, the guests. A dry cough echoed from the doorway. Baron Dylan entered, followed by his butler. Seeing his unruly knights so subdued, the Baron let out a cold snort. "Everyone is here," he said indifferently. "Let us begin." As the butler closed the doors to prepare dinner, Dylan took his seat. Kan stood, brushing his chest in an elegant salute. "Uncle Dylan, it has been a long time." "Yes," the Baron replied, his face a mask of ice. "And Baron Kan, I believe it is best you address me as Baron Dylan. We are of equal rank now." A low chuckle rippled through the vassal knights. It was a heartless remark, a public jab that made Manhwa stiffen and the Saranid riders flush with suppressed rage. But Kan simply smiled. He knew that pride without strength was a fool's errand. "Uncle Dylan," Kan continued warmly, "I still remember the short sword you gave me when I was 6 years old. I have it still." Dylan's eyes narrowed, a flicker of emotion softening his gaze. Seizing the moment, Kan signaled to Manhwa, who produced a clay pot. Kan placed it on the table and opened the lid. "A gift, uncle," he said. "Fine white salt, as beautiful as snow, only this is worthy of your status." The knights gasped. In these lands they ate bitter, brown salt. This head-sized jar of pure white crystals was a fortune. Dylan's expression turned solemn. "This is too valuable. Tell me, Kan, what difficulties have you encountered?" "None," Kan replied smoothly. "It is merely a token of my appreciation." Dinner was served: roast pork, sausages, and cabbage soup, but the mood remained rigid. The knights ate like wolves, their eyes occasionally darting greedily toward the exquisite chainmail worn by Kan's men. When the meal finally ended and the knights departed, Dylan leaned forward. "Now, tell me the truth. Is it gnolls? Do you need my army? Because if so, 1 jar of salt is not enough." Kan leaned in, his voice calm and steady. "No, uncle, I have no gnoll crisis, but I remember, your wife is the daughter of a merchant, is she not?" Dylan's face darkened, sensing an insult to his noble standing. "Do you wish to humiliate me, boy?" "Not at all," Kan smiled. "I simply wish to start a long-term trade with you." Inside the Lord's Hall, the air was thick with the scent of burning pine resin. Torches flickered against the stone walls, crackling in the silence, while uncleaned food scraps sat forgotten on the long table. Beside the master's seat, a chubby steward stood frozen, his face drenched in cold sweat, hoping his humble silence would make him invisible. But no one was looking at him. All eyes were on a jar of white salt. Manhwa had placed it before Uncle Dylan, and in the dim light, the substance inside shimmered like fallen snow. This was no ordinary seasoning. It was a luxury for nobles and a precious material for the mages of the high tower. "Slow. WLY?" Dylan reached in. He let a pinch of the fine grains trickle through his fingers like an hourglass. "This is good stuff," he murmured. His voice was cold, but a faint tremor betrayed his excitement. Kan sat opposite him, a calm smile playing on his lips. "That is the trade I offer you, uncle." Dylan's eyes narrowed into a terrifying, battlefield glint. He took a deep breath to steady his racing heart. "Kan, what exactly do you mean by this?" "A long-term trade," Kan replied smoothly. He knew Dylan's advantage. His wife's family were grain merchants with roots stretching across the South and East counties. "A salt mine," Dylan whispered, the realization hitting him. "Yes," Kan chuckled. He didn't blink. "I can guarantee 10 jars every single week." Dylan stared at the young baron, realizing the shy boy he once knew was gone. He nodded slowly. "I was your mother's old subordinate, I accept." Kan maintained his sincere expression, though he knew the history. His mother had been dead 15 years, and her loyalists, like Dylan, had been pushed to the barren fringes of the duchy. Dylan was hungry for more than just salt. He was hungry for power. "This is the beginning of our success," Kan said. Dylan leaned in, his voice dropping to a low hiss. And the price? 50 large silver coins per jar, Cand answered. That is 150 coins cheaper than the market rate. Dylan's breath hitched. The math was staggering. 10 jars a week, 72,000 silver coins a year. That was more than the annual tax revenue of the capital city itself. My generous little Cand, Dylan smiled, his eyes gleaming with a sudden predatory greed. On my honor, we shall be the best of partners. Cand laughed, looking perfectly sincere, even as he watched Dylan struggle to suppress the urge to seize the desert mines for himself. The deal was struck, and as the torches flickered low, the balance of power in the North County began to shift. The dinner concluded successfully. Cand spoke a few more words with Baron Dylan, then parted ways as the night grew late. Led by a maid, they walked toward the rooms arranged within the official residence. Manhwa, the 5 Serenade riders, and the desert bandits were also staying in adjacent rooms, receiving equally fine treatment. However, back in the Lord's Hall, the torches were still burning, filling the air with a suffocating smell of smoke. Baron Dylan sat quietly in his chair, his eyes filled with a restless excitement. At the main entrance, 2 burly figures pushed the doors open, the Baron's true right-hand men. Sit down, Dylan said casually. You two were next door. You must have heard everything. The knights nodded. They had been positioned nearby for protection, as the presence of the elite Serenade riders had given everyone a faint sense of palpitation. But the Baron wasn't thinking of safety. He was staring at the jar of white salt on the table. Is there a salt min? In the Nalan Desert, Dylan asked. We have been at Jianxi Pass for nearly 10 years. How is it we have heard nothing? The knights lowered their heads in shame, but Dylan waved them off. A dangerous light flickered in his eyes. He suspected Cand had found a mine deep in the desert, perhaps near the Sentry Oasis. He even wondered if Princess Sophia was secretly supporting the boy. Wait quietly, Dylan whispered, clenching his fists. With the money from this salt trade, I can recruit more knights. Even the Viscount will have to worry of our strength. In his own room, Cand rested quietly. He and Manhwa had spoken briefly, but the thin walls kept their conversation shallow. He knew that among nobles, only profit is eternal. He had shown the Baron a taste of wealth and a glimpse of his strength, enough to secure a peaceful honeymoon period for a year. Cand smiled to himself. In 1 year, with the help of his system, he would no longer be a young lion cub. He would have the claws and fangs to protect his own prey. The next morning, Cand woke and joined his men for breakfast. The hall was filled with bumpkin knights, crude men who stared at the Serenade riders' iron armor with malicious envy. Cand snorted coldly, sensing that his journey away from Jianxi Pass might not be entirely peaceful. Cand did not have to wait long. With the arrival of Baron Dylan, breakfast at Jianxi Pass officially began. The hall was filled with the rhythmic sounds of service as well-trained servants brought in the morning meal. It was nearly identical to the previous night's feast, minus the light ale, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Baron Dylan, once cold and distant, was now radiating enthusiasm toward Cand. Sufficient profit, it seems, is a language everyone understands. This sudden warmth did not go unnoticed. The duplicitous vassal knights sat with sour expressions, their eyes darting between one another in silent frustration. They looked at the fine chain mail worn by Cand's Serenade riders with naked covetousness. But with the Baron now favoring the young man, their chances of seizing such prizes had vanished. Once the meal was finished and the knights dismissed to tend to the endless threats of gnolls and bandits, the Baron led Cand into a private reception room. The walls were lined with the grim, mounted heads of prey. Baron Dylan gestured toward a massive, wolf-like trophy. That beast, he said with a proud, jagged smile, was a demonized creature. It had the strength of a great knight. It killed 20 of my soldiers before I took its head. Cand offered a smooth, effortless compliment. A powerful monster indeed, Uncle Dylan, but in the end, it hangs on your asterisk wall. The Baron laughed, the sound echoing off the stone. The 2 men sat and the conversation turned to business. Cand confirmed that the salt supply would begin at the start of next month, managed by his merchant Manhwa. The Baron's eyes gleamed. He was picturing the 72,000 large silver coins that would soon flow into his coffers each year. For a moment, he looked at Cand not as a nuisance, but as a beloved nephew. But Cand was no fool. He knew this harmony was built entirely on interest. He also knew the danger. The Baron's martial strength was formidable, and his offer to lend Kand 100 infantry to help defend the Sentry Oasis was a thinly veiled attempt to seize control of the salt source. Kand politely declined the help, citing his own capable soldiers. With the deal struck, Kand led his men Manhwa, the Serenid Riders, and the Desert Bandits out of the fortress. As they rode away from Jianxi Pass, Kand looked toward the horizon. The mission was a success. Soon, the salt would turn into silver. And that silver would turn into the food and tools needed to transform his desert oasis into a kingdom. As Kand led his team through the city gates of Jianxi Pass, he was unaware that dozens of eyes were tracking his every move. Among the shadows, 5 hooded men who had followed him since his arrival slipped away to report to their master. Deep within a hidden basement, these spies stood before a man reclining in a chair. His tone was languid as he questioned them, but they had no answers regarding the secret meeting between Baron Kand and Baron Dylan. The leader did not anger. Instead, he gripped a crutch and limped toward a heavy wooden door. Behind it lay an underground labyrinth of secrets. The crippled man approached a shimmering crystal ball, its blue light pulsing as he whispered to an unseen contact. When the light faded, he returned to his men with a cold, calculated plan. "Have Miss Jacqueline accompany you," he ordered, "in the desolate desert." He watched them leave with a mocking smile, knowing how easily young nobles are swayed by pride and a pretty face. Meanwhile, in the filth of the city slums, another plot was brewing. Inside a timber shack, 40 desperate men gathered before 4 burly figures. These were Baron Dylan's own vassal knights, the very same men who had eyed Kand's Serenid Riders with such greed at dinner. These knights were bitter. For 5 years, Dylan had denied them the land and titles they craved. Now they planned to betray him. Their goal, to ambush Kand, steal his wealth, and defect to the rival Viscount Wayne. "We have the men," the lead knight growled, his face gloomy. These were men who had spent years robbing caravans and masquerading as bandits. To them, Kand was nothing more than a golden opportunity. Unconscious of the closing trap, Kand spent his final hours in the market, purchasing logging axes and farm tools for the Sentry Oasis. He moved with the focus of a leader building a future. While on the mountain paths flanking the pass, 2 separate factions were already racing into the desert, positioning themselves to strike. The market at Jianxi Pass sat like a scar next to the slums. A small, underdeveloped hub where commerce barely breathed. Here, the stalls offered little more than crude farming tools and blacksmith shops for repairing the battered weapons of the soldiers. Because the Sanvia Mountains loomed nearby, teeming with gnolls and demonized creatures, the wear on steel was constant. Kand, however, was not impressed. Having grown accustomed to the high-quality gear produced by his system, he looked upon the local craftsmanship with a cold, discerning eye. The blacksmiths wore ingratiating smiles, their eyes gleaming as they sized him up like a wealthy noble sheep. They presented swords of inferior iron as if they were legendary treasures. Kand simply rolled his eyes. When he saw the bulky, useless leather armor studded with scrap metal, he let out a sharp sigh. "Enough," he commanded, tapping his stirrups. "Prepare to depart." Manhwa and the others moved quickly. To Kand, these weapons were nothing but trash. Truly skilled artisans were strategic resources. They lived in wealthy, noble castles, not in a poverty-stricken hole like Jianxi Pass. Manhwa finished the final trade, handing over 3 large silver coins for 50 iron tools. The desert bandits bundled the heavy sacks onto their horses, alongside 5 days' worth of food and water for the trek across the Nalan Desert. "Lord Kand, everything is ready," Manhwa reported. Kand nodded and the team began their exit through the north gate. They passed through the slums, a place of filth and sewage where scrawny, hopeless people dodged their horses' hooves. Kand frowned. He thought of his own village, Durham. Though it was in its infancy, it was a paradise compared to this. Here there was only despair. "The task is arduous," Kand whispered to himself. Sentry Oasis was his foundation, and he would fight to ensure it never became a ruin like this. At the gate, sallow-faced conscripts strained against the heavy log winches, bowing deeply as the party passed. They knew Kand was a guest of Baron Dylan, and in this world, a baron's status was reason enough to grovel. Once clear of the canyon, the majestic warhorses broke into a gallop. The rolling sea of sand appeared, the vast Nalan Desert. For Kand's Serenid Riders, this was home. As they rode, Manhwa pulled his horse alongside Can's. Lord Cand, this cooperation with Baron Dillon, I do not think it will last. That is right, Cand replied, his voice calm. No one gives up a salt mine willingly, greed is endless. Cand knew the Baron was playing a dangerous game, planning to seize the mine once he grew strong enough. But the Baron had made one fatal mistake. He did not realize that with the system, Cand's power would grow 10 times faster. Suddenly, the lead Serenade rider pulled his reins, his voice dropping to a low growl. Something is wrong, Lord Cand. There is a situation ahead. Cand narrowed his eyes. There, at the base of a distant sand dune, more than a dozen cavalrymen air charging directly toward them. People are rarely seen in the Nalan desert, but today the silence is broken. A dozen unknown cavalrymen gallop across the dunes, their intentions a mystery. Sensing danger, 5 Serenade riders move forward to block the path. They unhook 3-meter-long spears, gripping them tight, while 10 desert bandits flank them, eyes cold and vigilant. As the dust clears, Cand narrows his eyes. A woman, he says slowly. Indeed, a lone woman on a white horse is being hunted by the riders. Manhwa draws his short sword, watching the pursuit. In this desolate wasteland, such a sight is strange. The desert bandits, former outlaws themselves, sense a conspiracy. They look to Cand for a command. Don't get involved, Cand orders, steering his horse aside. Give them a path. He knows the canyon of Giantshi Pass is nearby. If she is fast, she might reach the garrison. His men, hardened by the chaos of Calradia, follow suit. They have one rule: do not meddle. But the woman has other plans. Seeing Cand, she veers toward him, crying out in terror, "Help! Gentlemen, help! Bandits are chasing me." She charges toward their line, but the Serenade riders do not budge. They level their spears and roar, "Stop!" The woman recoils, pulling her reins so hard she tumbles from her saddle, crashing into the sand. She looks up, her fair face streaked with tears, her emerald eyes pleading directly at Cand. "Save me! My father is a wealthy merchant. He will pay you." The pursuers catch up, their faces fierce. The leader sneers at Cand, "Hand her over if you don't want trouble." Cand looks at the girl, her silk dress, her light green hair, and then at the bandits. The air is thick with tension. Finally, Cand speaks, his voice indifferent. "Oh, all right, please go ahead." Silence falls, the woman freezes in shock, even the bandits are stunned. Cand simply nudges his horse to move on. "It's none of our business, let's go." Desperate, the woman crawls into his path, blocking him. "No, I will give you 500 silver coins." The bandits find their nerve again, brandishing swords. "Do you know who we are? We are the Demon Fang bandits." Cand looks at them, his expression bored. "Are you idiots? Drag her away, she's blocking my path." The woman trembles, pointing a finger at him in disbelief. This was supposed to be a hero's moment. This was supposed to be foolproof. Cand looks down at her, the corners of his mouth curling into a cold smile. "Do you know why I won't help?" he asks quietly. "Your acting is far too poor." Cand's voice fell to a whisper, "Do it." Suddenly, Manhwa's voice echoed his command. The Serenade riders and desert bandits, always on high alert, spurred their horses forward. In a blur of motion, they crossed the 12-meter gap, leveling their spears. The dozen enemy cavalrymen didn't even have time to react before the steel tips pierced their leather armor and sank deep into their chests. Blood stained the sand. The beautiful woman in the white silk dress watched in pure horror, her emerald eyes wide with disbelief. Within 10 seconds, all 12 men lay dying on the ground, their internal organs shredded. Cand and his men remained expressionless. To these hardened veterans, the Demon Fang bandit group were nothing more than children. "It's our turn," Cand said with an indifferent, aristocratic elegance. The woman collapsed, arching her back in a desperate, seductive plea. "Spare me, I'll tell you everything, I am yours," she wailed, tears streaming down her face. Cand didn't even look at her, he stared toward the sand dunes. "Don't be excited," he murmured. "I was talking about them." Over the ridge, 4 knights and 40 infantrymen approached. The woman, thinking she was safe, babbled about being an undercover agent. Cand calmly reached into his pack, drew a light crossbow, and slotted a steel bolt. "Is that all?" he asked. "Yes, take me with you," she cried, clutching her chest. Twang! The bowstring vibrated, the bolt struck her square between the eyebrows. "Mount and blade," Cand said coldly, "does not need women." He turned to Man-eyed, "Be careful, this is an ambush from Giantshi Pass." As the 4 knights and 40 infantry drew closer, their faces turned pale at the sight of the corpses. They tightened their formation, but Kand only mocked them. "To plunder us with only 4 knights, who gave them such courage?" Kand rode forward with a deceptive smile. "Ah, Uncle Dylan's knights, are you here to save me from these bandits?" The knights, plotting to take Kand hostage, forced smiles. "Yes, Baron, we are here to help." Kand chuckled, lowering his crossbow, then snapped it up and fired. The bolt tore through the lead knight's throat. As the man fell, gasping for air, he saw his 3 companions struck down by a rain of javelins and spears. The last thing the knight saw before the darkness took him was Kand's cavalry herding the panicked infantry like sheep, and the cold, insidious smile of the young baron. The battle ended with a chilling ease. 12 cavalrymen from the Demon Fang bandit group, 4 powerful vassal knights, and 40 armed militia members now lay as corpses, their blood soaking into the desert heat. The Serenid riders and desert bandits paced the field on horseback, cleaning up the scene with cold efficiency. Anyone still twitching was met with a steel-clamped scimitar through the chest or a winged mace to the skull. Lord Kand's order was absolute: take no prisoners. Man-eyed Kand's loyal subordinate rode over to report the tally. "My lord, it is settled. 56 enemies annihilated, no survivors, and no casualties on our side." Kand's mouth curled into a mocking smile. He looked down at the body of a beautiful woman in a white dress. An iron crossbow bolt was embedded in the center of her forehead, ruining her features. "With such a shallow scheme," Kand whispered, his eyes turning cold, "do they really take me for a fool?" He knew this was no accident. The Demon Fang bandits wouldn't be chasing a helpless girl in this desolate no-man's land. It was a conspiracy, a swift, fierce attempt by the factions of the Lion Duchy to obliterate him the moment he returned. The reward, a new scimitar, and a warning that this was only the beginning. Kand signaled his men to move out. They had wiped out the ambushers in mere seconds through a sudden, brutal strike. Even the 4 vassal knights hadn't stood a chance. "Remember to tell Baron Dylan about this," Kand instructed Man-eyed. "He is a smart man, he will know how to handle the fallout." Before departing, they stripped the dead. They captured 14 horses and dozens of sets of low-quality armor and spears. While Kand's elite forces looked down on such gear, it would fetch a fair price from mercenaries at Giantshi Pass. As the sun climbed, the group continued deep into the Nalan Desert, looking more like a wealthy merchant caravan than a war party. Behind them, dozens of naked corpses were left to the vultures. Half a day later, 5 hooded riders discovered the carnage. Terrified, they snatched up the woman's body and fled toward Giantshi Pass to report the failure. Soon, the news of the slaughter spread through the shadows of the city, yet strangely no one moved. The factions went into hibernation, waiting, watching, and fearing the man who had survived the sand. Inside the Baron's mansion at Giantshi Pass, the air was thick with more than just the midday heat of the Nalan Desert. The patrols were tighter, more rigorous, and inside the reception room, Baron Dylan sat with a face of pure gloom. His eyes burned with a naked killing intent that he struggled to suppress. Before him stood his 2 most trusted vassal knights. They had just returned from the desert with carts full of corpses, the remains of the 4 fallen knights who had tried to betray him. To the public, these men were heroes who died fighting demonized creatures, but Dylan knew the truth. "Only you 2 put my mind at ease," the Baron sighed, his voice raspy with anger. He paced the room, cursing the other knights as trash and bastards who only sought to cheat him for land. He knew why those 4 had died. They were trying to murder his nephew, Baron Kand, to curry favor with his rival, Viscount Wayne. "My lord, please," one knight whispered, glancing toward the door. "These words must not spread." But Dylan slammed his fist onto the table, *crack*, his rage boiling over. He knew the nobles of the North were squeezing him, ostracizing him because of his past as a commoner soldier. "My lord," the knight continued, "we found something strange. Members of the Demon Fang bandit group were in the desert." Dylan snorted. "The Demon Fang, that is just a puppet for Viscount Wayne. It seems that old bastard is finally moving to take my pass." He narrowed his eyes, his voice droppy. "NG," to a low growl, "increase the patrols, someone is infiltrating." Meanwhile, in the damp shadows of a slum basement, 5 hooded figures stood over a corpse. It was the beauty in the white dress, Jacqueline. Her pale green hair was splayed across the floor, and a crossbow bolt was still buried deep in her forehead. The spy leader limped forward, his shadow dancing in the flickering candlelight. "Is the battlefield clean?" he asked. "They will blame the bandits," a spy replied. "No clues were left." The leader dismissed them with a wave of his hand, but once alone, his face twisted in fury. Jacqueline was a masterpiece he had spent 10 years training. Now she was just useless trash. "Baron Cand," he hissed into the dark, "how much did Princess Sophia truly leave you?" He reached for a crystal ball to report to his masters. Like everyone else, he assumed Cand's strength came from hidden royal legacies. No one suspected the truth. No one knew of the world-crossing power, or the name, Mount and Blade. Hooves left shallow pits in the sand as a column of 33 horses advanced through the desert. Can led the team on their return journey. 2 Serenid riders guided the way at the front, while the rest followed in silence. The environment of the Nalan Desert was harsh, but for the Serenid people born of the desert race, it was commonplace. They endured the scorching heat, using the dunes and the sun to navigate the most direct route. They had traveled a great distance from Jianxi Pass. Having journeyed for an entire day, dusk was now approaching and they had encountered no mishaps. This was the Nalan Desert, a desolate forbidden zone so cruel that runaway slaves would rather commit suicide than set foot in it. Seeing a stranger here was truly a difficult feat. Can reached for his water skin, pulled the stopper, and took a gulp of lukewarm water. As his throat moistened, his weary demeanor perked up. "My lord," Man-Eyed said, nudging his horse closer, "we should reach the post station by 8 o'clock tonight. Having a post station is very convenient." Can nodded, squinting at the vast sea of sand merging with the sky. "Fortunately, things have settled down now," he sighed. He nudged his horse's heels, calling out to the team, "Pick up the pace. Let's strive to rest at the post station tonight." Everyone put in some effort. The speed of the team increased. They were faster now, having transferred supplies to the backs of captured horses. Cand considered acquiring more mounts, perhaps 2 or 3 per man, to match the legendary endurance of the system's cavalry. As the sun cast its final twilight glow, the Milky Way took over the sky. The temperature plummeted. Puffs of white mist formed with each breath, tiny droplets condensing in the frigid air. Cand and his men pulled their thick linen cloaks tight. Suddenly, the leading rider narrowed his eyes. "That's..." In the distance, a 2-story building stood aga. Inst the flat sand, light seeped through the windows, the warm glow of a fire. "We've reached the post station," Can voiced. They spurred their horses forward. Inside, construction workers startled at the sound of hoofbeats, grabbing chairs and sticks in defense. But the door swung open and Can smiled. "Relax, my Rodok friends, it is not an enemy." The tension vanished into cheers of Lord Cand. The air inside smelled of roasted bread, sausages, and cabbage stew. The workers eagerly served the weary travelers. Cand rubbed his chilled cheeks, sitting down to the unexpected feast. A late-night canteen, he smiled to himself. Interesting.